Hello, I'm Dr. Bill Nicoll, um, and I am a co-director of the Resilience Counseling Training Center here in North Conway, New Hampshire, which operate along with my other co-director, my wife, Dr. Monica Nicoll. We provide counseling services, consulting services, training services to counselors and educators worldwide, both online and live and in person, which hopefully we'll be returning to and not too soon as we go through this final stages, hopefully, of the COVID pandemic. I'm going to talk to you about developing social emotional learning programs in the schools, especially in international schools. Let me tell you a little bit about my background. I'm now 50 years in the fields of education and mental health. So I've been around a lot, seen a lot, and learned a little something along the way. I started out as a teacher for behavior disordered children, moved on to school counseling, where I worked in public schools, I've worked in international schools, and I've worked on schools located on military bases. I also focused a lot on family counseling and have done great work on the issue of school-based family counseling and the need for school counselors to be able to work effectively with family systems dynamics as a resource to parents, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. And for the past several decades, I've been a professor of counseling and department chair, as well as a consultant for the U.S. Department of State's Office of Overseas Schools and many of the international regional organizations around the globe, as well as to universities and school education systems of other countries around the globe. So a great deal of international work and background there, both with American-based programs and with foreign-based programs. So let's talk about resilience first. What is it? We hear it a lot these days. It's become very popular. But by resilience, we're really talking about developing mental health. And many people talk about resilience as the ability to bounce back, to respond in a positive way. But at our Resilience Counseling Training Center, we take a slightly different approach, because we've seen over the years all too many people and children, as you listen to their stories, you realize they have never had a positive life experience. They don't have a positive place to bounce back to. You can't bounce back to someplace you have never been. So let's look at it as a two-part. It's first of all, the ability to set a positive, productive, fulfilling, and goal-oriented direction in one's life. That's what we're trying to do with an SEL program. Help them develop this positive, fulfilling direction in their life, while also being therefore equipped to handle life's inevitable adversity, stress, failures, setbacks in stride. So it becomes then the ability to bounce back. Having that as a base, we can bounce back when we have these life experiences, adversity in life, and get back on track in that same positive, socially useful, contributing direction in life. Along that line, resilience can be seen as both a social vaccine and an antidote. Particularly like the idea, and this is what we're focused on in SEL programs, the social vaccine idea, which is very appropriate in these times of pandemic. Immunizing children, giving them the skills to immunize them against the adverse effects of trauma, loss, stress, and all life social ills, depression, substance abuse, anxiety, loss, trauma. It's interesting that probably when you think of immunization and vaccines, the name that most comes to mind is Dr. Jonas Salk, the man who discovered the polio vaccine, the pandemic of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And on the 35th anniversary of his discovery of the polio vaccine, he was asked a simple question. Dr. Salk, if you were a young research scientist today, on what would you focus your research? And his response, I'd still do immunization, but I'd do it psychologically rather than biologically. And when we're talking about developing social emotional learning programs in our schools, that's what we're talking about. A psychological vaccine, immunizing against what life will throw at us inevitably. And of course, it's also an antidote for people who are, especially children who are experiencing difficulties, struggles in life. It's about teaching health, providing the healthy environments they need to respond and to develop in a positive direction, as opposed to trying to control and redirect symptomatic behaviors. Now, there's an old saying attributed to many different people, but we'll ignore that and just focus on the saying. It says, those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. So let's take a moment to look at the history of SEL initiatives over the past well over 100 years, longer than that. It's not a new idea, but why would we see it as a new idea? A fad of the times. Why hasn't it become central? If we can go all the way back to Aristotle in ancient Greece, who said, educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. And John Smith, who founded Phillips Exeter Academy in 1781, probably the first school open to the general public in the United States, issued his mission statement to his staff, which continues this day as being, quote, above all, it is expected that the attention of the instructors to the disposition of the minds and morals of the youth under their charge will exceed every other care. Well, considering that though goodness without knowledge is weak and feeble, yet knowledge without goodness is dangerous. And that both united form the noblest character and lay the sweetest foundation of usefulness to mankind. This is exactly what we're talking about, a comprehensive social emotional resilience-based program. And I don't think it'd take long for anybody listening to this presentation to name 3 or 4 names right off the top of your head of people who are highly intelligent, well educated, but lacked those social emotional competencies and have proven to be dangerous in this world. And lastly, we have Dr. Alfred Adler, who in the early part of the 20th century, after World War I, decided to focus more on prevention after his battles and arguing with Sigmund Freud in the Psychoanalytic Society. And he said we need to focus more on parents and schools and develop mental health there so we don't have to work with it in a clinic down the road. And he said, the teacher who takes time to work on their students' social development will find his or her job simultaneously amplified and simplified. It is far easier and more effective to teach the cooperative, responsible, well-adjusted child than it is to nag, to threaten, and to prod along the uncooperative, irresponsible, discouraged child. In all my years in this field, I've never had a teacher, an administrator, or any educator argue that point. So, there's a few, just run through history. The 80s and 1940s, we had the progressive education movement, the Horace Manns, the John Deweys, the Maria Montessori. In 1905, I have a textbook that was used for training teachers called Public School Methods. And Chapter 8 was on moral training. And it's always interesting for me when I read that. We don't have time right now, but you'd swear it was written 2 years ago. The issues they're saying about youth are exactly the same issues we're saying now. In 1906, the field of school counseling got started with the work of Jesse Davis in Grand Rapids, Michigan, who noticed with all these immigrant children speaking different languages, changing cultures, that there was something beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic they need to learn. So he started school counseling by suggesting that instead of 5 periods of English composition a week, how about we do 4 and devote 1 period a week to developing their social emotional skills. And that was the origins of school counseling. That's where we all started. And here we are again, starting up again. The Character Education Institution held national competitions in the United States during the 1920s into the 30s on the best character education programs. 1922 was won by the state of Iowa. Then we, of course, we had World War II and the Cold War, and we get focused more on reading, writing, arithmetic. The Kona Report and National Defense and Education Act of 1958 got schools focused on science, engineering, and mathematics. In other words, send kids to college so we can build more bombs, more weapons, more missiles than anybody else. And resilient social emotional learning became lost in the process. But coming into the 60s, we had a lot going on in the 60s. We had, and so there was a revival of social emotional learning. And we had Dinkmeyer's Do So kits, developing understanding of self and others. We had the Tribes Learning Community program, began in the 70s. And of course, we get derailed again in the 80s and for about 20 years with The Nation at Risk, Blueprint 2000, No Child Left Behind, introduction of high stakes testing movements. Again, we focused on reading, writing, arithmetic, and forgot all about resilience and mental health. In the 80s, we did have a preference at the Quest program by the Lions Club International. We had another social emotional effort, the Collaborative for the Academic Social Emotional Learning, SEL, which operates this day with a great deal of research on the effects of social emotional learning. In the early 2000s, the development of the European Network for Social Emotional Competence, which is still functioning today, a very good international organization, focused primarily in Europe, but has participants from all over the world. And they operate out of the University of Malta in the Mediterranean. Okay, with over 100 years of doing social emotional learning, why is it not central in education? Why are we starting again to build programs? Why is it a new topic? What has gone wrong is the issue. Now, quickly identify 9 areas that I see. Number 1, the tendency to be very authoritarian, control, compliance oriented, try to get children to behave the way adults want them to behave for their needs, not in terms of what are the skills the children need in life. And I see many programs today still making that same mistake. A lot of them were too limited. They focus only on emotions or behaviors or values and are not comprehensive. This is probably my pet peeve for everything in education, the tendency to buy prepackaged off-the-shelf programs, the one-size-fits-all SEL program. Which one shall we use? Well, that only works if you make the assumption that all children around the world are exactly the same. They all have the exact same needs, exact same issues. So a program for Iowa is good enough for a program for a school in Nairobi, which is good enough for a school in St. Petersburg, which is good enough for a school in Kuala Lumpur. All children the same, and children in each of those schools never change. There's no new issues, and of course we know that's just not true. There's different issues in different schools. The international schools you work in, each one of them is very different demographics, different dynamics going on. And therefore, we need to be able to develop our programs to be fit for our school and get involved in doing that rather than a prepackaged one-size-fits-all. 4th is the failure to integrate academics with social emotional learning, failure to involve parents. We need to have everybody working together on this and talking the same language so we're not contradicting one another. A common problem is the failure to address teacher social emotional learning. We walk in, here's the prepackaged program, we want the teacher to implement it, and how well developed is the teacher's social emotional competencies? The school district of Oakland, California, the superintendent there discovered this and made the comment the program failed because we needed to teach the teachers first to get them on board, not to teach the students. Well, the teachers modeled, or at least some of them modeled, the exact opposite. The classroom climate has to be inconsistent with what we're teaching in our social emotional competencies. So conflict in social emotional versus the school culture, the social emotional content for school culture. Jim Collins wrote a book on Good to Great, looking at successful versus unsuccessful businesses, organizations, and so forth. And one of his comments was very appropriate to this. He said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you're not addressing your school and classroom culture, whatever lesson plans you're doing, whatever strategies you're using to develop social learning, it will be eaten for breakfast by the culture. We have to change the culture at the same time we're teaching these skills. Number 8, oftentimes there's a lack of staff ownership and engagement. Engagement is critical to implementing any kind of a program, so everybody feels they're a part of it. It's their program rather than here's something our administrator saw last summer at a workshop. We've had 2 days of training and now do it in your classroom. This is a common problem in education, the new reading program, the new math program, whatever it might be. And we never see anything happen. And Larry Cuban wrote a book called Inside the Black Box of the Classroom. Because what happens, we get training, we send that program into the classroom, but the classroom becomes a black box. The door is closed, we don't see what goes on. And some people implement, some don't implement, some partially implement, some undermine it. So therefore, the data coming out is mixed. We need to get everybody on board. And the ninth, and this is going to become one of my pet peeves over the decades, the failure to collect meaningful data, okay, to evaluate and support our program. We need to be able to say, here's what our SEL program has contributed to the school, to the students, and to remove the program, to not follow up and continue to implement the program, we're going to lose these things. For example, one school had very diverse demographics in their school. A lot of kids speaking different languages coming in from various socioeconomic backgrounds. And they had, as they kept track, an average of 250 incidents of fighting and social aggression in the school annually. By the third year into this social emotional learning program, which was a very well developed, comprehensive one, that figure was down to 25 per year. 250 per year down to 25 because of an SEL program. Think of how much time that allowed to devote to learning and how much safer environment it felt for children as they were trying to learn. Okay, so how do we develop resilience? That's kind of an important thing to look at. And that's a bit more comprehensive than we sometimes think about. It's not just teaching mindfulness. It's not doing breathing techniques and relaxation techniques. It's a lot more than that. So the research literature has suggested 4 main areas. And by the way, I'd suggest you might want to look at the work of Bonnie Bernard on her book, Resilience, What We've Learned. Look at the research, and also the work of like Carol Dweck on mindsets. But let's run through the 4. Number 1, availability of a supportive, nurturing social ecosystem. All living organisms, in order to grow in a healthy manner, to survive and thrive, they require the availability of a supportive, nurturing ecosystem. Fish need the water to have the right nutrients, the right temperatures, and be absent of toxins. When plants fail to thrive and so forth, we don't ask what's wrong with the plant, we ask what's wrong with its ecosystem, the soil, the water, the amount of light, sunlight. When animals start dying or becoming diseased, not thriving, we ask not what's wrong with the animal, what's wrong with the ecosystem, what toxins, what are there, what nutrients are missing. That's where we solve the problem. But somehow when children fail to thrive or have difficulties, we ask what disorder, what disability, what disease does this child have, instead of asking, let's look at its ecosystem, the family, the school, the community, the classroom. These are the primary ecosystems, and they need to be healthy and nurturing. So, important to involve all those factors in our social emotional learning program. Second, the development of essential social emotional competencies. This is, of course, what most people focus on in an SEL program. There's many different programs out there, and there's dozens and dozens of programs, very good activities. So how do we pull them together for your own school? Well, as looking across the literature, it seems to be 5 recurring themes, essential competencies. Number 1, the ability to understand oneself, sort of the Aristotle's know thyself. I think that's Aristotle. Maybe not, but anyhow, ancient Greece. Understanding, respecting yourself, understanding emotional self-regulation, who I am, my relationships, my family, my background, my culture, and understanding others, my similarities and differences with others. Second set of skills is empathy skills or competencies. These have been called the meta-social emotional competencies. More important, your degree of empathy determines how much you'll learn all these other 4 areas. In fact, if you look at the DSM or the ICD, you can almost rank from milder mental emotional disorders to the most severe on one factor, degree of empathy. More mentally healthy people, less disturbed or less discouraged people have some empathy. But when you move to the most severe disorders, the personality disorders, the psychopathic, the antisocial, narcissistic, the common characteristic is a total lack of empathy. And they are the dangerous ones, even when highly educated. Communication skills. We need to teach children effective communication, both receptive, how to listen to understand, and how to express ourselves in an effective way. And we need to understand our verbal communication and nonverbal communication. Cooperation is the fourth skill area. Interesting area. One thing life is going to require you in every setting, the ability to cooperate, is work as part of a team effort. Okay. Unfortunately, in many schools, cooperation is seen as by a different term, cheating, instead of cooperative learning. Of all the grades we receive, K through 12, there's only one grade that research has said is highly associated with future life success. And we only receive that grade in kindergarten, maybe first grade, never again. It's that little line that says, Johnny works and plays well with others. The ability to work and play well with others can be taught and be honored and valued. And fifth, responsible contribution. The ability to take responsible for oneself and for one's own behavior. And also social responsibility, to be responsible to my community, to my fellow classmates, to others. How can I contribute to solving problems, rather than how can I make sure I'm not blamed, or I can blame others, or I can avoid the issue. Third, optimistic growth mindsets is characteristic of people with resilience. Okay? It does not develop from being taught directly, it develops out of the communication patterns between adults and children. So we have to examine how we communicate as adults, as parents, teachers, counselors. Okay? Are we focused on effort, improvement, optimism, progress, promoting a growth mindset? And have we rejected the fixed mindset perspective, which permeates our education system? The assumption that there are biologically predetermined degree of abilities and talents that we can measure, we can evaluate, or there are disabilities, dysfunctions, disorders explain, well, little Johnny's not doing as well as the next student. Okay? We need to get rid of that and start with the assumption all children have the ability to grow and develop and be nurturing that in our communication. And fourth, we need opportunities to develop a positive self-identity. We need to feel socially connected and recognized as being a sense of belonging, personal autonomy, but also a sense of I'm separate, I'm part of the group, but I'm also separate and have control, I'm not controlled, equality and respect, meaningful contribution, developing a sense of being a worthwhile human being. And we all need a sense of there's something in life which I'm good at, I have competency, I've mastered, and make sure we focus on that. And sometimes in school that's somewhat limited in what we recognize is important. Okay. Supportive, nurturing social ecosystems. I'm going to, because of time, just mention these real quick, and you're welcome to look at the handout on that or contact me for more information. But clearly, safety maintenance, my first maintenance task of I call it the 5 maintenance tasks of a healthy organization, a healthy ecosystem. I feel safe physically, emotionally, verbally, psychologically, and sexually here. Failure to provide that is a form of abuse, neglect, maltreatment. Life skills maintenance. We need to live in social ecosystems that teach us both the academic skills we'll need for life, as well as the social emotional skills we'll need for life. Cohesion maintenance. Every study done on effective families, classrooms, highly effective families and classrooms and organizations, the factor that comes out number one, separating them as being different, is that sense of cohesion. It's an us, a belonging, caring system amongst all members. Pause, supportive, direct encouragement. They have rituals and traditions to celebrate who we are and who our values are. And we find communication, a minimum of 5 positives for every negative is required to be able to function adequately. Less than 5 to 1, you see symptoms and problems. Above 5 to 1, you start getting healthy. Behavioral maintenance. Behavioral expectations. Sometimes our school discipline policies are out of sync with what we're trying to teach in social emotional learning. And we've got to think about that. Okay? Discipline is not about punishment. Discipline comes from the word disciple. It's an educational, not punitive process. Do we have appropriate disciplinary methods used to promote social emotional learning rather than a contrary and contradictory to what we're teaching in our SEL program? And the last is boundary maintenance. Here in New Hampshire, we have a saying that goes, good fences makes good neighbors. And that's true. Autonomy and connection. The relationships between parents and their children, rather than the helicopter parent, over-involved parent. separation between extended family and the nuclear family. That varies by cultures. The teacher-parent boundaries all need to be recognized and addressed in a healthy manner. Save that for another time, but it's a thing to consider. Okay, we talked already about the social emotional competencies here, so I'll move on. What have we learned about comprehensive social emotional programs when done well? What are the outcomes? And consistently, the research tells the following, and this is one of the ways to get people involved in it. Number one, there's an increase of anywhere from 11 to 17% in academic achievement with good SEL programs. That's significant because if I say I develop a new mathematics program, a new reading program, that increases achievement by 3 to 5%, every school system in the world will buy it. But here is SEL, 11 to 17, and we don't address it. There's a decrease in behavioral problems, aggressive behavior, classroom disruptions, as I just explained to you with one school. Excuse me. There's an increase in positive social behaviors and interactions among students and staff. Decrease in bullying incidents. Decreases in absence and dropout rates. Increase in school graduation rates and going on to higher education. Decrease in student mental health concerns, depression and anxiety and so forth. Decrease in substance abuse and drug abuse problems, and an increase in student preparedness for college and workplace expectations. There's been a lot of research on what do we teach in our schools and what skills people need when they go into college and go to the workplace, and we find a huge disconnect, and it's almost always in the SEL area. Okay, and what about international schools? What are the special issues that advocate for social emotional learning? Number one, my biggest concern, I often hear in international schools, oh, we're a great school. We have great students, great parents. SEL is not such a major priority in our school. In actual fact, research indicates that high-achieving, high-performing schools present very unique concerns for the social and emotional well-being of its student population. Some of the issues that you're going to need to address, high-performing schools, academically, athletically, extracurriculars, are found to be also at increased risk for bullying and social aggression. Okay? Indeed, the characteristic of most schools that have had things like school shootings, from Marjory Stoneman Douglas in Florida to Columbine, these were all high-achieving, high-performing schools. Because they're high-achieving, high-performing, they're focused on being better than, so there's always the ones at the top and the ones at the bottom. And it's the ones at the bottom, the rejected, are the ones that are going to feel hurt and start the bullying and social aggression. Student marginalization increases with diverse student populations. Diverse nationalities, ethnicities, religions, cultural, racial backgrounds can also mean splitting into groups, and that we lose that sense of cohesion and understanding each other. Large host national populations in an international school create a greater risk for social exclusion, non-inclusive school cultures, especially for third culture kids, because some of these kids are going to go through K to 12 in that school together, and other children are going to come in for 2 or 3 years and move on. And it's real easy for them to feel marginalized, because they do get marginalized. That gets added to number 4 when there's a large non-English but shared common first language student population. Creates increases for social exclusion. The social language of your school is different from the instructional language, and that divides students, and it works against healthy development and a healthy ecosystem. High SES families that may unwillingly model non-empathic attitudes or discrimination when they're interested with household staff, drivers, housekeepers, nannies. This can occur at the school also, and how we treat our staff in our school, the custodians, the lunchroom workers, and so forth. Obviously, existing international tensions can create some problems. The permissive disengaged parenting style. We know there are 4 parenting styles, and one of these, the worst outcomes come from permissive disengaged. It disproportionately occurs amongst the very low income and the very highest SES families. And international schools tend to have a lot of the high SES families. This is the kid who, in this case, they have everything. They have a car, they have a nanny, they have a driver, they have summer vacation and skiing in the Andes, winter vacation in Switzerland. They get everything except one thing. a mother and father who are actively involved in their life. They're living their own lives. And this is detrimental, the sense of losing that sense of belonging in their own home. Teachers and ministers can be prone to unduly marginalized transient international parents. Okay? We tend to run our international schools often from the British or American system and forget that many of the parents coming in have never experienced the system. It's totally different. How do we make them feel welcome and move in and be part of the system rather than feeling I'm a third, fourth culture parent coming into the school? I don't know the culture of the American school, I don't know the local culture, and I'm not in my own culture, and I have to go through all three of those. High achieving, high expectation parents can become verbally, psychologically, emotionally abusive by pressuring kids to look good, to achieve, to enhance their parental image in the community. I call this projective narcissism. So we see a great deal amount of high performing schools, high performing students also dealing with problems with a lot of anxiety, depression, substance abuse, because there's that constant pressure. How are we addressing that? Our SEL programs can do that. High risk environments for adolescents are found to include poverty, trauma, ACEs, and high pressure to achieve. 3 or 4 of these occur in our international school populations at a disproportional rate. That's a concern. We have levels of stress that are found to be higher than the national norm in high-performing schools. Those increased rates of depression, substance use, rule breaking, somatic disorders. And we also find social emotional competencies predict college, career, and life success 70% greater than does your IQ, your grade point average, your college entrance exam scores, your achievement tests, or self-esteem measures. So why aren't we working on developing these skills? I'll quickly end with how do we develop a social emotional learning program? I have here an 8-stage process from awareness in the community to forming a SEL team. Focus on those teachers, those staff members who want to work with you. Others will come on if it's working and doing well, but don't try to fight against the stream. Who really wants to be on board? And we'll start there. What are the unique challenges and issues in your school? We have to address that. How are we going to measure change on those issues if our program is effective? How do we develop our staff to get them involved and develop their social emotional competencies and growth mindset language? Then we can all develop our SEL curriculum, not only the lesson plans on social emotional learning, but also how to integrate that with each teacher's academics. So we're reinforcing in the academics. What is the counselor support services? As it is a curriculum coordinator for SEL activities, are more concerned with school culture activities and provide implement support. And finally, data collection. How are we doing? Where do we need to improve? What do we need to address? What effectiveness are we having? So with that, I'll offer you free. We've developed little social emotional learning examples of activities and how we structure them in our program. Haven't got time to go into it, but you can download that free by clicking on here, going to our website. 25 activities for parents and teachers to develop social emotional learning in children, to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, and that's free of charge. Take it, download it, you got it. And how do we develop those skills from the activities, the classroom activity, follow-up academic lessons, and parent what we call homework activities, the activities for parents to do at home. It's the parents' homework, the family's homework, not the child's. And for further questions, please feel free to contact us at the Resilience Counseling Training Center for any of our services and so forth. Thank you very much. I hope you found this useful.